okay, I'm going to do my best to go through this as quickly as possible. There are a lot of slides. If we get through everything or you get to the end, that is wonderful. If not, I understand we're at a crunch for time right now. But I really think that following through the steps are going to help you be better at animation for this unit. So, for the animation project, um, like we're familiar with animation and we all have our favorite shows. I know I grew up in the old Nickelodeon times, and some of you might recognize shows such as, like, obviously SpongeBob, but I really like the animation in things like Regular Show and Adventure Time. But everybody has their own kind of show that they really hooked onto and a style of animation that you really like, including movies like The Lion King and the newer one Encanto, which is more of a digital animation or on the computer versus frames or paper animation, which you would know like happened before. So, the history of cartoons, we're going to be really quick about this. But it started way back in 1908 with Amelia Cole, and they created what is widely considered the first animation cartoon called Phantasmagorie. And then we had really popular named cartoons such as Gertie the Dinosaur in 1914. Felix the Cat followed not shortly after that. And then Steamboat Willie, which is the like original Mickey Mouse illustration of 1928 with Walt Disney. He's the black and white, driving the boat. Next to Oswald, his other character, those were some of the earliest animations from our Disney families. So if you're interested in seeing how the old animations, these links are in the slideshow. The original animation, like Snow White, was done individually and then layered. So it was really meticulous and really interesting how they even took photos of different layers of images to make it look like there's depth or movement. Like when they were panning into the castles or panning into a certain area, they would physically have like three or four big plates of these different images that they would move the camera through on top of doing paper animation. It was a super detailed process. And while today's animation is still very complicated and takes a lot of skill and practice, it's a lot easier because it's a lot more computer generated. And you kind of just move and adjust where you want things to change. There's a really cool Bluey episode, and don't tell me you don't like Bluey. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it, or maybe you'll like it one day. But there's a really cool Bluey episode where they show part of the animation process right at the end. My son loves it, but it's a very different way of going about it. And the process that we're practicing is kind of a marriage in between the two. So your first practice you guys already completed. You did the bouncing ball practice. It was very simple, just like a drop. And you were just kind of seeing how you build up the frames and how you layer those frames. As you know, you turned on the animation assist under the actions tool and you drop that ball. And as you can see in the example here, there's more layers at the top where you have the circles. And as those circles stretch, they show that movement going down and then they squish towards the bottom. A little jazzercise, guys. So watch your speed. The amount of frames used will determine how fast or how slow the objects in your animation will be. The more frames you have, the slower your object will appear. So that being said, just because you have a lot of frames, if you don't overlap your drawings closely together, it's not going to show that slowness. Like if you space them out, it's going to look very disconnected as you go. But yes, the fewer frames and the more you spread things out, the faster it's gonna feel like it's in a rush or quick or moving across the page fast, versus if you have a ton of frames and you do these teeny tiny adjustments along the way, that's going to feel slower, and you're going to have more detail in your animation. So we're going to look at the squash and stretch technique. Squash is when an object compresses or it squeezes down, and stretch is when it like elongates and gets kind of narrow so that it feels like there's a lot more expression or movement in those objects. For example, this character's face as he's shocked, and then he squishes because he starts to get angry, and then he stretches because he starts to yell. and then that squish comes back as he adjusts back into his normal frame. Same thing here, the squishing of the balloon or the squishing of the faces of the characters, and even in Pluto where the stretch of the eyes, like the shock or the scaredness, and then the squish to be scared or shy, or like he hears something. Like think about when you make expressions and something makes you wince or you get angry, you squish your nose and your face together. Or when you're really shocked or thrown off guard, you're gonna like like your eyes stretch open, your mouth stretches open. Animators took those expressions and they just over exaggerated them because you really want that expression or that movement to come through on paper, and you want it to be over the top so that it pulls your viewer into the frames. So you're going to do second bouncing ball practice. Since you did the first one, this one should go a lot faster, where you're going to have spacing, and mine is not going to be as detailed as this, but I'm just going to show you real quick. Whoops. I'm going to just go here. I'm going to go into Procreate, and I have two kind of mini versions. I don't have mine quite as spaced or put together, but I do have the frames of the bouncing ball, and you can see where it compresses onto the ground. I have this little squish happening so that when you see that ball bouncing, you'll see that slight squish. Same thing here, and these took me all of like 5 minutes to draw. But you'll see that squish in here. You can see I added more stretch, so it started normal, and then as it accelerated, the stretch happened. It hit so it holds its shape, but as it compresses, it squishes, and then it's going to expand back. Circle, squish, stretch. So once again, you have that bouncing ball. We'll also talk about weight, so that'll be your second practice. That should not take you more than half a class period. All you have to do is like add a frame, draw a circle, add a frame, draw a circle, and it should go really, really fast. So you could probably knock out that first one and this one all in one class period if you're working diligently and not playing on your phones, which you should not be on anyways. So the weight, so the heavier or lighter something weighs or feels in an animation is how it also moves through the frame. So heavy objects, if you were to drop like a bowling ball and a feather at the same time, which one is going to hit the ground first? Obviously the bowling ball, because it is heavier. So you want to make it move fast. You want to have it hit the ground harder. You want to have something heavy look like it's being lifted harder, like you're showing that extraneous activity as you move, versus something light, especially like a feather, where it feels like it's floating or it's going to move a lot slower through the air. So we're going to do a little practice for that. And I have one in here. Oh, the ball is still going. Where I have a feather and a little bowling ball. And you can see, if you look really closely, look at all the layers of how this feather is barely across the page here. You barely see any space used because I just overlapped, versus the ball where you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they move like rather quickly through the frame. So what I did here is once that ball hit the ground, I drew my bowling ball first, and then I just duplicated the layer so that that bowling ball stayed there. And then I kept adding the feathers so that when I animate it, and I could do better on the animation up in this area, but for demo's sake, I just made it pretty quick. But see, once that ball hit the ground, I just duplicated the frames over and over again, and then I went back and drew in that feather floating down, and you can see how much I overlap and how close I put those little shapes together. So it took a lot more frames, whereas like that bowling ball is done by maybe frame 10, and then I had an additional like 15 frames of just the feather falling. So the more frames you use, the slower something is going to look. The fewer frames and the more you space it out, the faster it's going to look. So that's kind of an example. You guys will do something like that and it'll be pretty quick. So again, feather and something heavy dropping. And just again, talking about weight when you're showing that animation, use that stretch and squash kind of method too to make something look heavy. You can show like someone trying to lift something heavy versus something light. Like, how does the body express that? How does the object express that in either the way it's being held, the way it's moving, the way it's dropping? If someone is carrying something heavy, they'll move slower because it's so heavy. Like, you don't go running with, your 25 bags that you carry at the end of the day if you're in sports and school, versus someone who has nothing because they walk out of school because they did all their homework early, where that's a lighter load. So think about how you are going to show that in your animation. So we've talked about speed and spacing, we've talked about squash and stretch, and we've talked about weight. So now we're going to talk about anticipation and keyframes. So anticipation is kind of the wind up. You see, especially in the older cartoons, this like extra movement or really exaggerated movement that they wind up as you're anticipating some kind of move or motion or drive into the image. So in frame 2, you can see how the character like pulls back, arms back, leg up, and then they whoosh, take off. So that anticipation of what's coming next in your character. If he would have just been standing and started walking, he would just look like he's walking. That build up and that anticipation really help make it look like he's moving into something quick. Not everything needs it though. For example, if I'm this person who's anticipating I'm throwing the ball like a baseball pitcher, and I'm throwing the ball but I'm only throwing it at a target, like the target doesn't move until I hit it. So not everything, maybe your objects or your end result don't have that anticipation. Maybe you have a rabbit jumping out of a hat, like the hat may not move, and then here comes the rabbit and you see like the ears, and then you see it disappear and then it pops out. But certain things may not move depending on kind of what you want the illustration to look like. And you can always ask me if you have any questions about that, like what should you animate or what shouldn't you animate. So keyframes are the ones that you kind of guide along, and I did like how I drew my bowling ball first. I built those keyframes up, and your keyframes are your most important frames that show like kind of where your animation is going without filling in all the detail quite yet. Like you're getting your big motions or big moments illustrated out, and then you fill in the rest in between. So for example, the blue dots, you can see I have the start, the top, and then this enlarged part kind of in the middle. So I'm showing that like acceleration in the middle, and then the large area at the end where I have like the end result. But I would fill in all those little blue dots later. Or the one on the left where I have the person standing, then the person squatting. I would draw those in and then fill in the space in between with like the motion of them squatting in between. But that gives me an idea as an animator where my animation is going, and I can see some quick progress without getting so detailed along the way that, I mess up and I have to erase all that. So if I build up keyframes first, then I can fill in the blanks and add more detail. Think about when you're doing your artwork in any other class in any other art project where you block in the color on your food drawing. If you would go in super, super detailed without drawing it out and then blocking in color and kind of figuring out where everything goes, almost like mapping it out first. If you just go in with the super tiny detail in the corner and don't have everything else kind of planned and you mess up, you're going to have to start all over again. So by creating a map or a key from the beginning, you have more of a guide and you're going to have a little bit more complete. Once you have your keyframes drawn in, then you can add in those extra details as I just mentioned. So we're going to kind of mix these two practices together. So yes, we're going to do another small practice. And again, let's see where we get. I'd rather you guys be more versed in animation than have like the final get-go, because like the animation process is really long. And if I just throw you in, they're going to look kind of terrible. So I want to make sure you understand the whole process first. So you're going to draw a character. It could be something really simple. Like this girl here has actually quite a bit form going on there, but think of a human, an animal, or a creature doing some kind of action. So remember to create that anticipation. So the wind up, the squish, and that stretch to show either that run or that jump or that throw or that bite, the claw scratch, like how if I was a tiger and I was going to show an animation of a tiger like scratching something, I would pull the paw back to show anticipation, and then few frames with a quick swipe. So I would just do like 3 frames to show like beginning, middle, end of a swipe so that it felt quick, and that motion was fast and over with in my animation. So plan out, and I would just make this short, like 1 quick movement. It'll still be quite a few frames, but it'll be worth it. And then secondary animation is when you animate something first and then you go back and revise it, which if I go into this one is what I did here, where I animated first the bowling ball. I did this part first and I did my whole animation. I'm going to go back and erase out that circle there. And then I went back and did a secondary animation of the feather dropping. But you can also do a secondary animation if you had, like maybe I want to do, this is a really detailed animation here. Maybe his hair curl kind of flops in the wind, whatever. I can always go back once I animate all of this and maybe adjust out the ears a little bit. So that they start to curve down. It could be funny. Let's see where it pops up in here. It's not going to show too fast, so I'm going to slow it down. I don't have enough pages, but the secondary animation essentially is going back and revising and adding more animation to an object or a person that you already have. That is the wrong tab. There we go. That you already have in your slideshow or in your animation, sorry. Think about angles, be creative. Maybe don't do everything super straightforward. Think of something coming at you. Think of something going away from you. Think of something growing and then shrinking. But there's different types of shots. Like you have your background shot, and you guys will create a background slide and then build on top of that. But you have your full shot, which is very straightforward and kind of, you know, the easy way to go. But you could do like a full shot and then zoom in, so you get like this really close up. You can have from a worm's eye view where you're looking up at the object, or a bird's eye view where you're looking down at the object or person. You can have like this mysterious, like you're eavesdropping into someone's conversation by over the shoulder, that there's 2 people, or your point of view that you all know very well from all of the TikTok point of view stuff that you guys see. So thinking about, like, say you have a person shooting out of a cannon and the cannon's really far. Like, I can go in here and draw this real quick. Let me draw a new one here. Like, maybe you have this, like, teeny tiny, like, cannon out here, and you have, like, this person who's ready to shoot out of it, and then, like, as they get closer, like, you have them like really close up. So they came out of this really small cannon all the way over here, and they're like, and you can animate out like, well, I don't want to make him look like he's pooping or anything, but like flying through the air. So he would be really small out here, and then medium right here, and then he's larger as he gets closer. So think about what kind of angle or perspective you want to use as you go about your project. For the last practice, create like a simple, and this might be your final animation, like some kind of simple character either bouncing, and think about doing some kind of secondary animation or movement. But if you do have time for the final project, again, I think I'm going to have to just kind of balance it and see where we're at. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll do a lot of these practices, and that smaller animation in the previous slide might actually be like your final, depending on size and time. I will possibly give this a product grade since you've done so much practice, and then that could count towards what we need to do. But if you guys really are into the animation, consider using one of your kawaii characters, or maybe you just have like a niche with a character design or like a favorite character. Think something simple though. Don't go over the top. Like, don't think you're going to draw, I don't know, give me some kind of detailed character off the top of my head. Like, yes, a Disney character. Like, you're not going to draw Rapunzel or Lightning McQueen and do a full animation with that much detail. Think smaller, like BMO from Adventure Time or Patrick Star kind of thing. Don't copy exactly from what's out there, but think smaller, simpler characters with less lines so that you can focus more on the animation. Think about everything we've done: squash and stretch, speed and spacing, weight, keyframes, anticipation, and doing secondaries or camera angles. To help, this is a really good way to plan out your animation is to storyboard. If you have time or you want to plan that out, like, more power to you. I think storyboarding is really important. That's how the professionals do it. We might eliminate that just for now because of time, but it's important to look at. Really great way to kind of plan out what you want to do. And you're like, it's only a couple slides to do a quick little doodle sketch to get an idea of what you want to do next. The creative process, keyframes in betweens. I'm just going to kind of rush through this so that you guys can get working. But things to keep in mind: a background. The backgrounds that you use in your final animation need to be well thought out and fit in the theme. Do your best with a high level of craftsmanship. I know where you guys are at this semester. You know what you have at your fingertips when it comes to using references or drawing something out and taking a photo of it and working from that. So take advantage of some of those workarounds in digital art where you can cheat, and have a little bit of extra help in your drawing process so that when you're doing your animation, that's not the thing holding you back from good craftsmanship. Your animation should be colored. Play around with color dropping. If you really want to push yourself, do some shading. I think that would be really good to experiment with. And then make sure your lines are clean. Think about using, depending on your style, if you want it to be really simple, think about using monoline to do those really, or fine line, just to do those really nice clean edges and lines throughout your stuff. And it'll make it easier for color dropping. If you guys have questions, let me know. I'll be around to help throughout the process. I know this is a really long PowerPoint slideshow, but it goes over everything. I really look forward to seeing what you guys create. And don't be afraid to look up. I'm trying to think. I think his name is, let me look it up. I think this guy has some really cool like animation shorts. If you want to look up any good, let me find his shorts here.
As you start your animation journey,
Really
the initial goal is to make a
examples
drop go down.
Of how to like just push your animation, and he talks about these shorts. So Steph Koons is
After nailing the
his name.
basics,
He goes
work on
by that,
enhancing
but that's his name.
acceleration for an even more captivating fall. Finally, place your drop in a scene. Add some stretch and of course some highlights. And to nail the splash at the end, check out my post on animation hacks. Don't forget to save this post for later.
But he has some really good examples of like where we're at with the ball drop with the newbie area and how to push it to pro. So he has some really cool shorts showing different animations. Like here's like a flame one, there's a lightning one, the water drop. This one talks about moving animation and how to stretch out your timing. So a good look, and you can see how he's animated some logos. But I've actually learned quite a bit from him over the last year, just from watching his tutorials and giving me some kind of creative thoughts. So I was looking at the 12 principles of animation, as you see in the corner, just to see if there's anything I was missing. But go ahead, try the next bouncing ball tutorial, then get into the weight tutorial, and then do the 2 little character ones. And those character ones will probably be kind of your final project if we run out of time. If we still have the time, we're going to try to knock out the big one at the very end. Questions?